And I have started the recording.
Great, thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Tony Verhoeven, Marketing Manager at CSIA. Thank you for attending this month's CSIA webinar. A reminder that if you have questions for our speaker, please use the Q&A box to the right of your screen, not the chat box. This program, like many of CSIA's webinars, will be archived on controlsys.org, typically within 24 hours of the broadcast. CSIA just launched our own podcast. It's called the Talking Industrial Automation Podcast. It's a show to help you get to know the people that make modern manufacturing and processing possible. Along the way, we will touch on integration technology, trends, and challenges. If you are a manufacturer, end user, supplier, or system integrator interested in industrial automation, I hope you will enjoy the insights CSIA members will bring to this podcast. Visit CSIAExchange.com/podcast. Many thanks to John Weber, Monica Anderson, and the whole team at Software Toolbox for hosting and sponsoring our monthly webinars. Software Toolbox was created in 1996 to rid the industry of bad third-party software experiences. They do this by providing a variety of industrial automation software tools and applications. The knowledge of how they work together or with other automation software to deliver end-user value and a responsive, proven support process, all focused on lowering risk. Find them on the web at softwaretoolbox.com. Norma Watenpaugh is the founding principal and CEO of Phoenix Consulting Group, which provides education and consulting services with expertise in market development, strategy, multi-channel and alliance management, and ecosystem development. She is a frequently requested guest lecturer and speaker at industry events, speaking on partnering trends in digital transformation and Internet of Things initiatives. Norma is a board member of the Association of Strategic Alliance Professionals and former Best Practices Committee Chair of that organization. She has led the organization in developing professional certifications and revitalizing the ASAP Handbook of Alliance Management, often referred to as the Bible of that profession. She currently leads the U.S. delegation to the ISO Standards Committee for Collaborative Business Relationship Management and is the liaison to the Collaborative Innovation Management Technical Committee. She was named a Woman of Influence in Silicon Valley by the Silicon Valley Business Journal for her work in advancing best practices in collaborative working. Visit her website at phoenixcg.com. CG is Consulting Group. Please welcome Norma Watenpaugh.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I'm happy to be here. And welcome everyone joining us on this call. As many of you know, in this age of digital transformation, and as a colleague of mine said, it takes a village to help a customer transform. It's no longer possible for one company to have the breadth of skills and expertise and even product knowledge to deliver a digital transformation project or an Internet of Things project. So more and more we're becoming dependent upon partnerships to create that whole solution to be able to go to market around those kinds of complex opportunities. So I'm going to talk a bit about what makes up a successful alliance. What are the top 10 secrets that we find are characteristic of most successful alliances? So, a little bit about me. Tony gave me a wonderful introduction, but on a personal note, I volunteer with the Wilson Group to help end youth homelessness. And I'm an avid eclipse chaser. I saw the one this summer in Nebraska, which was my 6th eclipse, and the first one that I've seen without a passport. So that is my passion outside of helping companies and people become more collaborative and create more value in their most strategic relationships. So on that topic, what is an alliance? A transaction is often defined as an exchange of value. An alliance is something else. It creates value. It's a collaboration that creates that value, and it's often more than just two organizations. Simple two-organization alliances were never simple. But now what we find is that companies are surrounding themselves with ecosystems of partners and going to market as a multi-party alliance. In fact, a colleague from Intel said that most of the alliances they've seen around the digital transformation or Internet of Things kinds of applications are 6 or more partners. And that becomes quite a challenge to manage effectively. The organizations need to share resources. They need to understand, what are the risks in going to market together, what are the rewards, what their expectations in gain in creating value, and also sharing control. And that latter part is sometimes the most uncomfortable piece for many companies that want to rely on a hierarchical kind of governance. But in alliances, it's usually more about mutual agreement and consensus. And it can be very effective, it can be very creative, but it can be very different than what people are accustomed to. And so what we find is that, not all alliances are successful or effective. In fact, I can point to maybe 5 or 6 different management studies that say that success rates hover around 50%. Well, why would anyone bet on a flip of a coin? Well, when you get down into it, it's more than just random chance. What we find is that alliances or companies that approach alliances rather ad hoc, let's go have an alliance, fail 80% of the time. But on the other end, you look at the bell curve where 50% is the peak of the bell, you've got companies that are able to achieve 80 to 90% success rates. And the difference is they've invested in alliance capability. They recognize that managing these collaborations is a management discipline, that there's process, that there's skills and leadership required to make these things successful. So we're going to talk a bit more about what are those things. What are those secrets that make alliances successful, consistently high-performing and delivering value to the companies that are engaged in them? Well, there are 10 secrets that I'm proposing here that are actually coming out of the Handbook of Alliance Management, and this was a compilation of work from many researchers, academics, consultants, and practitioners. And we pounded this down into 10 attributes that we find in successful alliances, and they all kind of fall around the notion of leadership, skills and competencies, a process to manage the alliance, and culture. And we'll go deep into each of these so that you understand how each of them relates to how you form successful alliances. Strategic fit, synergy, great chemistry, reciprocity, transformational flexibility, effective governance, going back to that control, trust and commitment, executive sponsorship, joint planning, and continuous innovation. So let's start with strategic fit. And that is probably at the top of the list. Some of the others are a little bit more not arranged in order of priority or importance, but this really is because it establishes why you're partnering to begin with. What is the strategic fit? What is it that you're trying to achieve through the alliance, that common vision and alignment of purpose? And this is very important to achieve, this strategic alignment, because what happens when you do this is that the stakeholders align. They see the vision. They understand how it benefits their organization, how it benefits them, that alignment of purpose. So you don't have people going off in different directions. They all see the North Star, right? And that's where you're navigating. That's where you're heading. Everyone is focused on the same outcomes. So you have an alignment of purpose, of commitment, funding, leadership. It establishes the direction of the alliance, that strategic fit. That's not to say that your organizations have identical strategies or strategic objectives. They may be different, but they have to be in alignment. There has to be this kind of mutuality or synergy, which is our next secret to successful alliances, is this value-creating synergy. This is that partner math equation of 1 + 1 is something greater than 3. You're creating value. And understanding what that value is. Often I've worked with partners that only see what they get out of the relationship. So they don't see what their partner is seeking. And what happens when that happens, when you get into that kind of mode, is that, you know, if one partner isn't seeing the value, they're going to reduce their investment. They're going to reduce their level of commitment that is more in alignment with what they think is the, you know, outcome, the ROI. So neither of you may actually fundamentally and at the end achieve the value you're trying to create. So you're looking for that synergy, and keeping focus on it is foundational to a successful alliance. Chemistry, the relationship. Can you work with those guys? Do you trust them? Are you working collaboratively? We sometimes say that companies have the collaborative gene. Is just integrated into their culture. And sometimes it's not. But that doesn't necessarily mean that if a company isn't, you know, a good fit in this notion that you don't partner with them. Sometimes you find that the strategic fit is good, the synergy is good, you have operational excellence, you can count on them to deliver. Strong alliance managers know how to blend companies together. They know how to create this working relationship that actually advances the work of the alliance. And sometimes it's not easy because you have a different approach to how you do business, and this can create friction, it can create conflict, but it also can create innovation. It can also create a problem-solving environment that kind of brings you that next level higher. It's an understanding that diversity, that creative conflict can actually reduce positive results if you can manage that in a constructive way and not a destructive way. Reciprocity. I had a boss once that thought win-win meant he won twice. That was a hard environment to work within to manage partnerships. Because as we mentioned in the synergy, 1 + 1 is equal to something greater than 3. There has to be a positive outcome for both partners or all partners that are in the alliance. And that success comes from mutual success. It comes from sharing the risk, sharing the rewards, working toward a common outcome, and understanding that your partner is looking for certain outcomes and benefit. And, you know, I find in the most successful alliances, both or all partners are looking for how to work toward the success of everyone, you know, creating that bigger pie, you know, for customer value versus trying to ensure that you get a little bit more than your share. But expanding the pie, creating greater opportunity and value and profit for everyone involved in the alliance. And that as much as attitude as well in working with people who understand that aspect of collaboration, that it is about value creating for everybody, increasing the pie, increasing the rewards for everyone by sharing in the risks. Transformational flexibility. There are very few successful alliances that I've seen that are the same today as they were when they started out. alliances have a kind of a life of their own. In fact, we often talk about how you manage them through a life cycle. And part of that life cycle is being responsive to change, to being able to reinvent yourself, to adjust to new conditions, new business imperatives, new trends in the industry. And I'm pausing a bit to let that sink in, because that's kind of the world we're in right now with digital transformation and the opportunities in Internet of Things, is that things are moving very quickly. And we need to be very responsive and aware of those trends and being able to adapt to those trends. And sometimes it means the alliance we started out with is not the one that we're going to cross the finish line with. An example of an alliance that was able to make this kind of transition in mid-flight is one in the consumer industry, the Pepsi and Starbucks. You're probably all familiar with the bottled Frappuccino that you see in grocery stores and on the checkout aisles and in 7-Elevens and gas stations. They're everywhere. That wasn't the first product that alliance tried to produce. It tried a carbonated coffee drink, which, if you pardon the pun, fizzled. It just did not do well in the marketplace. But they had the foresight to say, well, we've got an alliance here. We've got, the workings of a opportunity to bring a consumer product to market. And Starbucks pulled a formula for the Frappuccino, kind of out of the archives, and said, let's try this one. And that one, of course, was a huge success. I think they said that within 2 years they were in 90% placements, which is enormous success for a consumer product. So sometimes you just have to be able to experiment a little bit, try new things, see what works, be more agile, if you will, particularly in fast-moving industries, so that you stay abreast of what's going on and you're adapting to change. Effective governance. We talked about earlier that shared control is sometimes a very uncomfortable concept for a lot of management, a lot of companies. And what we find in alliances is that there's this kind of balancing act between trust and control based on risk. And, if you're in a high-risk environment or you don't quite trust your partner to deliver, you're probably going to crank up that control knob, right? They're going to have more meetings, more governance, more reviews, want to see more of the data, and that can slow you down. I mean, and cause distrust, if you're cranking up the control. So while alliances are, the governance is trying to manage outcomes of performance and reduce risks, sometimes a trust-based alliance can move faster, certainly more fun to work within, and built more on mutuality, being able to come to common agreements, being able to understand how you reach agreements. Oftentimes, what you find in governance and how you make decisions is not on the org chart. You're looking at this hierarchical org chart and things blow up. Quite often the influencers in any company are not the ones at the top of the pyramid. They're thought leaders. They're people with great ideas, people with strong relationships, people who have built trusted relationships within their own organizations and with each other. So this is one of the skill sets of an alliance manager, someone who's managing alliances, understanding how to construct that governance that takes advantage of the right level of, checks and balances and review and management, the control aspects, and the right amount of trust in building common agreement, a common vision, alignment and commitment, the hearts and minds as well as the control mechanisms in managing an alliance. Well, we led with trust, so here we are. And this is a topic that often bears a lot of discussion. You know, what is trust? How do you measure it? How do you get it when you don't have it? I look at trust in a couple of different dimensions. One is, can you rely on your partner to act honorably, to not act against your best interest, to look out for your interests as well, not to take advantage or be opportunistic, but to look out for you. And another aspect is more about reliability. If they say that they're going to hit this deadline, then they do everything they can to hit that deadline. I recently worked with an alliance that suffered from that latter aspect, is that they thought they were doing fine, they were working together, and then they came up to a deadline and one partner was supposed to deliver, and they were so off the mark that it just became very troublesome within the alliance. And you know, the other partner was going, you had to have known that you weren't going to hit that deadline. You had to know months ago that you were falling behind. And, you know, the other partner had just failed to let them know. And, you know, the partner who was the wronged partner said, you know, if you had told us, we could have put more people, more resources, more investment. We could have helped you over that hump. We could have gotten you over the finish line to hit that. Because, again, you're looking for mutual success. When one partner is successful, you're both successful, and one fails, they both fail. So understanding that you're both in it together, that you're there to look after each other's interests, makes for the best alliances, the best working relationships, and it's largely based on how do you manage and nurture the trust between the organizations, both on a level of delivery, but also in acting honorably and looking out for mutual outcomes and mutual benefits. Actually, another anecdote here is that when I found I was working in a portfolio of alliances, and we asked how important trust was, we found out that when organizations had a high level of trust in their alliance, they didn't think much about it. They didn't rate it very high. It was kind of like air in that, you know, you don't notice that there's air in the room or that you're breathing it unless it wasn't. And when there wasn't trust, it was very obvious there wasn't trust. Kind of like air. If there's no air in the room, you would notice very quickly, and it's very painful. So that was one of the things that was a takeaway from that exercise, is that you always know when there isn't trust, and sometimes when there is trust, you take it for granted, and you shouldn't. You should always be building upon the trust in the relationship. Executive sponsorship is a critical success factor, and one we probably could have rated higher than 8. I've found that alliances that didn't have it often falter and fail, or when an alliance that has a strong executive sponsor and the sponsor gets promoted or moves on to another job, those alliances can really falter if they don't rebuild that executive sponsorship relationship. What does the executive sponsor do? Well, they provide air cover for once, and they can work across the organization. They need to be very senior leaders that can help articulate what the value of the alliance is, how it furthers the strategic objectives of the company, to be able to work with their counterpart at the other organization, the partner. Sometimes they're the spokesperson for, difficult news or great news. Sometimes mergers or acquisitions can really impact, the intent or effectiveness of an alliance, and often they're the carriers of that message to your partner about, you've acquired our competitor and this is what it means to us. Or, reorganizations are often the carrier of that kind of message. But they're also thought leaders. They help lead the culture within the company in terms of what is collaborative behavior, how do you support alliances, how do you work in a win-win model. And if the executive sponsors are not modeling that behavior, then nobody else is. So they are really leaders in that sense as well. We also often depend on executive sponsors to be the last stop in escalations and governance. You know, you try to solve problems at the lowest level of an organization, you know, at the peer level, closest to the customer. But when you can't, if you're at a deadlock, you start escalating up the organization and you try to get his manager meeting with your manager, et cetera. And usually the executive sponsor is the top of that hierarchy in resolving those tough issues and representing, you know, the interests of your company in that alliance, which is a key role, is also maintaining that strategic alignment and representing, you know, the alignment of the alliance in achieving goals. Joint planning. I just gave a series of workshops in helping a company build a process and a template and a model for joint planning. This is not one of the most exciting things that I do or what people do within alliances, but it's so important because this is the roadmap. If you decide that you are going to, you know, go to the moon, you know, the joint planning is everything and how you're going to get from point A to point B. And this is where you're going to embody a lot of these things that we talked about in terms of process and leadership and involvement, in that, you know, your joint plan fosters better collaboration. And in fact, one of the best practices that we recommend to people is that you don't want to jump into contract too soon. Take time to learn each other, to learn about each other and your companies. So this is often one of the first things that I recommend is, you know, build the joint plan, build the governance before you try to put the contract in place. You know, you might be working on an MOU, and you build on top of that. But the more you work together prior to signing the contract, the more you understand, you know, how well you're going to work together. You know, those things that you can't put into a contract because they're dynamic, they're changeable. So in this planning exercise, you know, one of the things that we wanted to do as outcomes is that you have a clear expectation of each other. What are the activities? What are the execution, the plan of action? Who's responsible for what? What investments and resources are you putting into the alliance? And being very clear about what each is contributing and what your expectations are in outcomes, so that at the end you can hold each other accountable to execution, to the investments you're making, and to the outcomes you're trying to achieve. Also, commitment to continuous innovation. Alliances are a natural incubator for innovation. Why is that? Well, because innovation is often created out of a diversity of thinking. You think about an example of an old one that goes back to the jacquard loom. These were looms that wove very beautiful brocade patterned fabric based on a system of cards that had little holes in them that controlled the needles of the loom. So a guy named Herman Hollerith saw this and said, aha, I can use that punch card to create a machine that was used to tabulate the 1890 census. And it was able to tabulate the results. Normally took years. They were able to do it in a matter of months because of this innovation that he came up with, the source of which was in the weaving industry. And there are countless examples of this. The Sydney Opera House, you all know the iconic building, covered with these beautiful gleaming white tiles. The builders were challenged in figuring out how to affix those tiles to the building. And they found their answer in the dental industry. You know, the cement they used to glue your crowns on turns out to be very powerful adhesive, and they use that to glue the tiles on. So when you think about alliances, particularly when you're dealing with alliances that are really cross-industry, and I think when we're talking about control systems and digital innovation, digital transformation, we're seeing that more and more. You know, we're bringing technology together with more traditional industries, and there's a source of really strong opportunities for innovation. If you're open to it, if you're willing to identify and try out new ideas. But innovation is more than just technical innovation. I also look at innovation in business processes, and alliances are great incubators of innovation in business processes as well. Why? Because your business processes are not going to be like your partners. They're going to be different. And one of the things that you do in alliance is figure out how do you merge those. And what I used to call joint problem solving is now often called collaborative innovation, because you're taking those two different ideas, those two different processes, and trying to figure out what's going to work best for both of you, which is often, you know, again, creating synergy, something that is more valuable than what was, you know, 1 + 1, your way, their way, and our way, which is more valuable and constructive for your alliance. So those are the top 10 things. I'd like to close with a quote, one of my favorite quotes, which is, in the long history of humankind and animal kind too, those who learn to collaborate and improvise most effectively have prevailed. A quote from Charles Darwin. And I think this is particularly poignant and applicable today when you talk about digital transformation, in that, you know, old industries are struggling to adapt. One of the things I heard in a recent CEO conference was that they're concerned of getting Ubered, right? A company with very few assets but a great digital business model can disrupt the industry, change things where the traditional, you know, taxi and limo and transportation industry are at a disadvantage. They have to adapt or they go extinct. And they have to collaborate because not one company has the full set of expertise and components to create a solution. So we're running a little bit ahead of time, so lots of opportunity for Q&A. You have a Q&A box there, so please use that. And the first question that I have here is from Erica Fritsch. What would you say the difference between a strategic alliance and a customer-vendor relationship? I would say that there's obviously a continuum. Often we hear people talk about how they're collaborating more with customers or with vendors, being, you know, more strategic, more collaborative. But I think fundamentally, you know, going back to the beginning definition of an alliance, is that, you know, a vendor relationship or customer relationships can be very transactional. It's very cut and dried. I will give you these services, I will give you these products, and you will give me money. That's a very transactional relationship, not much collaboration involved. But if you're working with a customer to, say, design a new system to manage, you know, process control processes from a single console or, you know, whatever it may be, that becomes a more collaborative relationship, and I would call that an alliance. It's a collaboration to create new value that couldn't exist before. Do we have any other questions?
Norma, I don't see any other questions here yet.
Okay. Well, I have a few frequently asked questions that I prepared for, and I think one of them that I get asked is, you know, when we talk about how we create value in alliance, how important is it that there is equal value in alliances? And this is kind of the curious thing about alliances, is that the value doesn't have to be split down the middle. It just has to be deemed fair by both partners. And an example of this is I used to work for a middleware company. For those of you who know what esoteric software, you know, middleware is, it is kind of the software that sits underneath applications. Not very exciting stuff. But we worked with a lot of systems integrators, application developers. And what we found in those relationships is that for every dollar of middleware software that we sold, these system integrators were getting about $10 of service value in the transaction. And we might have gotten upset about that, but we didn't, because services was the constraint on our business. There was no way we could build up a service organization to staff and to skill up a service organization to match our growth objectives. So it behooved us to work with these systems integrators, enable them to build up their organizations to work with us. And, you know, they removed the bottleneck in the business, enabled us to grow and to build software. And, of course, software is a lot less overhead than services. It's, you know, once you've developed the software, the cost of manufacturing is zero. So it's a very scalable kind of business. So it was a good model for us, even though, you know, if you divided the pie, it was 10% on our side and 90% on this SI side. Another question, is there a difference between a partnership and an alliance? This is a little bit of a tricky question, because if you talk legalese, there's a legal partnership definition where two entities own equal equity in, say, a company. So a joint venture might look like that, where there's a partnership and equal equity, or, you know, some predetermined equity. In the alliance word, we tend to use partnership rather loosely. It drives the lawyers crazy. So I tend to use the word partnering, or partner versus partnership. For that reason, I look at partner and partnering as a verb. It's what you do in an alliance, versus the, you know, formal legal definition of what is a partnership. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Okay, do we have any other questions? Well, I would like to leave the door open to folks on the call. They can reach me at normaw@phoenixcg.com if you'd like to further the conversation. If you have other questions, I'd be happy to respond to you offline. Tony, do you have anything else to add, or a question of your own?
Nope, I think that is, I don't have any other questions, but I'll check here after I start to close things off if something else comes through, and I'll make sure you're aware of it. Thanks so much for great presentation. I think that was a great taste of your expertise leading into the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your participation in today's program. Note that the full webinar will be archived on controlsys.org in the webinar archives under events within the next day or so. Also, many thanks to our host and sponsor, Software Toolbox. Find them on the web at softwaretoolbox.com. If you have not done so already, I encourage you to register for the 2018 CSIA Executive Conference held in San Francisco, April 24th through the 27th, and you'll see Norma speak. If you are contemplating CSIA certification, I highly recommend that you sign up for the Best Practices Workshop taking place just prior to the conference on Monday and Tuesday, April 22nd and 23rd, 2018. Tom Salda and Gordon Cox will be part of the instructor team delivering this workshop. Those folks are the couple of the auditors for CSIA. Visit CSIAExecutiveConference.org to register. If you missed our certification webinar, I kind of informally called it the under the hood of the best practices and the certification. You can find that now on our archive section. So go to controlsys.org and then find events and go to webinar archives, and you can watch that webinar where we had about 6 panelists all talking about the value of the best practices and CSI certification. That's all I have, Norma. No other questions have come through, so thank you very much. This is CSIA webinar, monthly webinars, and this is Tony Verhoeven. Thanks for attending. Goodbye.